Since its arrival in 2021, Porsche has been predictably rolling out the Taycan range, with a 4S, Turbo and Turbo S all now on offer, choices of sedan, Sport Turismo and Cross Turismo body styles, and GTS on the way. All are impressive in their own individual way, but all of that style and substance comes at a cost. You can spend up to $350,000 on the Porsche Taycan, which is a lot of money. If you had a slightly smaller budget and say $280,000, you could have this, the Cross Turismo Turbo. But if that's still too much money, then why don't we start stripping out some bits to see if we can drive the price down even further? Maybe we could take a bit of the alloy out of the wheels and pop in a smaller battery, and then while we're there, take out the onboard charger. And then while we're in there, let's go the full hog and take out the front electric motor and drive shafts. This is the new entry-level rear drive Porsche Taycan. With the introduction of the new Taycan variant called simply Taycan, you can now have a version of Porsche's mental EV for just $156,000. Yes, I know that's expensive, but it's a whopping 20% cheaper than the previously most affordable version, the 4S. Obviously, cost had to be cut somewhere, and this car has a smaller battery with a 79 kilowatt hour unit, lithium ion of course, and that'll give you enough range for about 369 kilometers. But for the cost of $12,020, you can pop in a 93 kilowatt hour battery, which will take you about 440 kilometers. Go for the bigger battery and you also get a bit more performance. Power goes from 240 kilowatts up to 280, and torque goes from 345 to 357 Newton meters. Interestingly, even though you do get extra performance, the 0 to 100 stays at 5.4 seconds. Now that's significantly slower than some of the other Taycan siblings, but I can tell you, it's still plenty. Actually, that figure of 357 Newton meters doesn't sound like enough. This car feels way more rapid. And perhaps that comes down to weight. With the smallest battery, this Taycan weighs just over 2 tons, and if you go for the slightly bigger version, it gains 80 kilos. So still the lightest version by a long way. And when it comes to chucking it through some of these corners, I think we have a new dynamic hero of the range. This thing just loves to be chucked around. And to be honest, I've never connected more easily with a Taycan. Maybe it's because it has more traditional Porsche values. I'm rolling on steel springs, not air suspension, and I've got a much lighter front end because it doesn't have a motor or drive shafts over the front end. And the overall lightweight, it just feels a little bit more like what I was expecting from a Porsche. It's dynamically unbelievably good. You can get a bit of tyre squeal there. At the absolute limit, you can get the tail to step out, but it's not really a drift king. It's just more about finding a line and cutting some surprising pace through these corners. Bloody hell. Most customers will chuck on a huge set of alloy wheels because on the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of extra money to outlay. But I actually quite like the aesthetic of the 19-inch wheel with a slightly taller tyre on it. And the ride has been absolutely remarkable. Those steel springs are really excellent. I'd almost recommend them over the air suspension if that system wasn't quite so supple. This one does also get adaptive dampers, so you get some excellent characteristics when you skip through all the drive modes. Also, the brake feel is really good. In some of the larger versions, it feels like regen is trying to work too hard, whereas in this you can get away with just more traditional braking operation. The steering is fantastic. There's so much feel, and that skinny little steering wheel just feels delicate and athletic. Yes, you do have the different sport modes and range modes, and you don't have the Porsche chrono system where you can select it on the steering wheel. You have to go into submenus in the digital displays, but I don't mind that. It's a much more simpler approach, and I honestly think I would go the base version to save all that cash and have a car that is dynamically, I think, superior. Another interesting point with this car, brake pads are normally changed when they wear down. That's normally dependent on how hard you drive the car or how far. Whereas with this car, regenerative braking is so effective, the pads can last many years longer. So they've introduced a new time-based schedule. If these pads last 6 years, you replace them regardless of whether they've been worn or not. That indicates just how effective regen works in this car. This car is equipped with a system called Electric Sport Sound. EVs obviously don't make a lot of sound, so Porsche has engineered its own noise for this car. And I love it. Seriously, some EVs just sound weird. There's ones that sound like the Jetsons cars, there's one that sound like bits of machinery. This sounds like the UFO in Close Encounters. At low speed, it makes this lovely, really bassy sort of warble. And then as you accelerate, more layers come in. Now, sometimes the sound is dependent on outright throttle aggression. Sometimes it's related to the revolutions of the motor, but this wonderful nature and charisma comes out in the sound, which I don't think I've experienced in any other EV to the same degree. As with most Porsches, if this just is a little bit too base spec, you can option it up with pretty much anything you like. You can put in a sunroof, you can put in some of the sportier bits of the 4S. Just about the only thing you can't add is a driven front axle. If you want that, you're going to have to go for the 4S. But if you want air suspension, you can have it. If you want the Sport Chrono Pack, you can have that too. This car in many ways reminds me of the 911. Now in that range, you've got lots of high performance versions that rise up through the 4S and the GTS and the turbos. But actually at the bottom of the range, there's the 911 Carrera, a car I absolutely love, and to all intents and purposes is probably all the 911 you'd ever need. And that's exactly how I feel about this car. This car has surprised me enormously. I was expecting it to be good, for sure. It's a Porsche and it's a Taycan. That car's impressed us numerous occasions in the various different variants we've seen so far. But this one I thought was going to be perhaps a bit of a rental spec that it was going to be difficult to recommend. Not the case at all. Its combination of sharp price, its dynamics, which frankly I think are favourable over some others, the performance is still easily adequate, and I'm guessing that if you went the small battery version, it's going to be even more lively. This car is not only very easy to recommend, I think it's probably the one I'd go for.